Hello everybody and welcome back to our lecture series. I'm Ted, your host, and for this lecture we're going to pick right up where we last left off. In our last lecture we sort of did a survey of the ancient Near East up until the arrival of the Persian Empire, and and this will actually serve as our final lecture on the on Mesopotamia. It will not be our final lecture on the Persians. They have a long career ahead of them, but this will serve as our final lecture, and we will stop here in this period. The period is sort of the climax of the developments in the ancient Near East. The Persian or Achaemenid Empire was the final of the ancient Near Eastern states, the great ancient Near Eastern state that established their hegemony. Um, the they will be succeeded by the Argead dynasty of Macedon. The Macedonian Empire will be formed out of the I guess the carcass of the Achaemenid Empire, and it will initiate a new phase, a new era in human development, and we'll pick that up in our next lecture block. Our next lecture block deals with China and the Hellenistic kingdoms. We go back to the Indus River Valley civilizations, and we discuss the Romans. But this is our final lecture on the early civilizations. This caps off our looks at those our look our look at those earlier civilizations that give rise to what we consider as the precursors to our own civilization. And the area prior to the arrival of the Macedonians under the Argead kings, the Persians, the Achaemenid Empire, ruled over an impressive stretch of territory, some 3,000 miles in length, from the Aegean Sea to the Hindu Kush, encompassing three of the four great river valley civilizations. And we know this empire, we know the dynasty that ruled over this empire had the Achaemenids, chiefly because of Greek sources. Achaemenid is of Greek origin, and it's the empire and the dynasty takes its name from a legendary figure named Achaemenes. The Persian Empire was the best ordered empire up until the Roman Empire, and it is thought to have had a maximum population of 45 million people. So it's extremely well ordered, has a high population, and it's very expansive. And it incorporates three of the four great river valleys, great riverine civilizations. They border up on the Hindu Kush. They take Egypt, and of course they control Mesopotamia. Now, the great kings of Persia, as they were known, these emperors, were regarded as the most noblest of the conquerors and imperialists in antiquity, mainly because of the favorable writings left behind by Jewish and Greek sources. Certainly the Assyrians, the Babylonians, and of course the Egyptians do not record them as being benevolent in any way, shape, or form. The Persian kings, unlike their predecessors, who were primarily known from their official court records and monuments, the Persian kings are known largely by a body of literature coming from the Greeks. Herodotus, in particular, traveled through the Persian Empire and wrote descriptions of all the Persian institutions, the operations of the Persian kingship. Herodotus, who was the first great historian in our tradition, he is regarded. He's often credited as being the father of history. He's regarded as the father of history, and in other corners, he's derided as the father of lies. Somewhere in the middle, you'll find Herodotus. Herodotus, in any regards, created a fairly accurate and much appreciated look into Cyrus the Great, Cambyses I, Darius I, and of course Xerxes I. And without the works of Herodotus and other writers who influenced the Western tradition, the kings and their accomplishments might as well be as remote to us as the Assyrians or the Babylonians. Now, these kings, these Persian great kings, they also deserve a great deal of respect for the way in which they ran their empire. And to begin with, let's look at the ancient Near East after the fall of Imperial Assyria in 612 BCE. Now, the Assyrian Empire fractured into four empires, all of which trace their beginnings back to the fall of the Assyrians. The four empires that emerged were Egypt, which was reconstituted as an independent kingdom once more in the Nile River Valley, the Neo-Babylonians, or the Chaldean Empire, which reformed the old Akkadian Empire of Sargon the Great, the Kingdom of Lydia in Western Asia Minor, and the Median Empire, which covered the Iranian Plateau and Eastern Asia Minor. Now, the Egyptians reformed their kingdom under the former Assyrian governor Psamtik, and Psamtik formed an alliance with the Libyan or Westerners living in the Nile Marches. He founded his capital at the city of Sais in the Nile Marches, and his dynasty, Dynasty 26, or the Saite dynasty, was largely responsible for returning a lot of order to Egypt. Psamtik was very loath to go adventuring outside of the Nile Valley. He did not go beyond the cataracts. It's under Psamtik that Egyptian and Nubian relations hit a very peaceful stride. The earlier antagonisms in which both sides attempted to impose hegemony on one another ebbed away. The Assyrian experience sort of normalized border relations, and the peoples the peoples living on either side of the border, they became much more reciprocal towards one another. It was much more conducive for good trade. Psamtik, he did not care about he cared about trade relations with the Levant, but he did not want to recreate the old empire, the imperial provinces of the Levant that the kings of the 18th dynasty and the 19th dynasty were so keen on maintaining and retaining. Now, Psamtik and his successors, they began this deliberate social campaign of reordering Egypt. What they did was they simply began to archaize Egypt. Their campaign really encompassed simply restoring the temples, sponsoring art that heralded back to the heydays of the Old and Middle Kingdom. This campaign was so good that there remains a somewhat large body of artwork and statues from Egypt that cannot be accurately dated. We don't know whether it's Old Kingdom, New Kingdom, or from the 26th dynasty, from the Saite period in Egypt. That's sort of the enduring legacy of Psamtik, that he was so good at what he did that we're largely left at a loss for explaining where some of this artwork comes from. Now, it is at this point that the Egyptian world it is this world that the Egyptians and the will become exposed. Well, not the Egyptians, but the Greeks and the Macedonians after them will become exposed to Egypt. This is the Egypt that they will visit and write about. The Greeks begin to cycle into the Nile Marches, which they refer to as the Delta. And many people still refer to the Nile Marshes as the Delta because it supposedly resembled the Greek sign for the letter Delta from their alphabet. Now, the arrival of the Greeks, it was first spearheaded by traders, by merchants who established themselves at a city called Naucratis. But soon enough, mercenaries came in to Naucratis, and they sort of formed this sort of independent Greek colony in the Nile Marches. And it really flourished as a major commercial center. It was a Greek avenue for exchange in which the Greeks were able to avail themselves of the resources of Egypt and of the African interior. Now, this is also the Egypt that Herodotus visited, a land undergoing an intense look back towards the past in the wake of the recent political and territorial reversals. Now, the kings of the Saite dynasty were loath to play the same great game of empire and invite disaster. They were loath to to go on an adventure that would court invasion and conquest by another territorial power. They were content to rule their kingdom. The dynasty lasts from the fall of Assyria until the Persian conquest, when a governor named Amasis overthrows the Persians, and rules as a strong man until his death. Now, from this point on, Egypt plays a limited role in in the history of the Near East, opting instead to revere older traditions and to simply look inwards. Now, the Babylonian Empire, or the Chaldean Empire, was forged by the Chaldean tribal prince Nebuchadnezzar and his successors at Babylon, who had also served as Assyrian vassals, who had served as Assyrian governors before leading the popular uprising that toppled the Assyrians. Now, Nebuchadnezzar and his son Nebuchadrezzar II proved to be great warriors, and they campaigned relentlessly across Mesopotamia and the Levant to recreate the old Akkadian Empire, chipping away at other states from across Mesopotamia and chipping away at the cities of the eastern Mediterranean Sea. They established an empire that stretches from the Persian Gulf, that extends from the Persian Gulf to the eastern Mediterranean. And they did not advance any further. They were content to rule over the traditional core areas of Mesopotamian civilization. The Neo-Babylonians are best remembered in Western audiences by people in the following the Western tradition for Nebuchadnezzar's victories over the Hebrews. He's remembered from Hebrew writings, and from Christian sources as the Babylonian king who conquers Jerusalem and deports the Hebrew elite. He is the king who inaugurates the period known as the Babylonian captivity. Nebuchadnezzar is also remembered for constructing one of the great wonders of the ancient world, the Hanging Gardens of Babylon, which were constructed to appease his Median wife, who was less than thrilled, let's say, she was less than thrilled with the rather dreary appearance of the Mesopotamian mudflats, as opposed to the rich floral and what do I want to say? Just sort of flowery landscape of the Iranian plateau. Mesopotamia and Babylon was, but before Babylon, before the Hanging Gardens, Babylon was just a set of buildings and walls, mud brick walls in the Mesopotamian mud flats. What the Hanging Gardens were a set of urban gardens, some 70 feet high, made of mud bricks, and they were really meant to replicate this sort of beautiful, very floral, very scenic landscape of Media. It doesn't survive to the present, but all of the sources from antiquity attest to the great beauty of the Hanging Gardens of Babylon. It was very impressive. But again, it was dwarfed by the pyramids of the Old Kingdom. Now, the Chaldeans, like the Assyrians, never won over the ethnic elites of Mesopotamia. They were viewed as sort of necessary evils, necessary choices to combat the Assyrian threat, but they themselves were not viewed as members of the old tradition, of the tradition that extended all the way back to Sargon, or even back to the cities of Sumer. They were not of that old mold. And their empire will be overthrown in 539 by Cyrus the Great. Now, Babylon was not sacked by the Persians, and the Persians really came to acknowledge that Babylon was the cultural heart of any empire that would rise in Mesopotamia. The Lydian Empire, the Lydian Kingdom, which emerged in Western Asia Minor, was centered on the city of Sardis. The Lydian Kingdom, the Lydian state, consolidated Asia Minor after a series of migrations disrupted the political organizations there. These migrations, that included the migration of the Cimmerians, overthrew the Phrygian kingdom, which allowed the Lydian kings to become the central power in Asia Minor. The Lydian kings fell heir to the old Hittite kingdom in western Asia Minor. Just as Egypt and the Neo-Babylonians fell victim to Persian expansion, the last of the Lydian kings to rule at Sardis was a man called Croesus, King Croesus, who is best remembered for his wealth. There was an old saying that goes back that says to be as rich as Croesus. Now, Croesus is also remembered. He's also remembered for a trip he made to the Greek oracle at Delphi. And Croesus, along with the other Lydians, were influenced by Greek culture. They were what we would call Philhellenes. They liked all things Greek. Now, it was also Croesus who fought the Persians, and he died. And he didn't die, but he did so after consulting the oracle at Delphi. And the Pythia, the seer, the one who divines the answers at the oracle, he's best remembered for his conversation with her. The Pythia told him that if he went into battle, a great empire will be lost. The Pythia was right. A great empire was lost, and the great empire was his. And angrily, after he lost his kingdom, after he lost his crown, he returned to the Pythia and he said, "Hey, what happened?" Well, he didn't say, "Hey, what happened?" but he questioned her, saying that she gave him bad advice. And the Pythia, it is claimed that the Pythia retorted that she never told him which empire would fall, which by all accounts is true. All accounts simply said that she said a great empire would fall. She didn't say that the Cyrus's empire would fall. She just said a great empire would fall. Now, the Battle of Pteria was unique in many ways, and that was the battle that Croesus lost. That sort of caused him to lose his crown, his kingdom. The battle was very unique. It was the first time camels were used decisively in battle, and supposedly the Lydian cavalry was so unaccustomed to the camels that they were reportedly thrown off by the smell of the camels. That they reared away and their horses reared away from combat, which allowed Cyrus to easily sweep in and defeat Croesus's land forces. His cavalry failed, and the horses were afraid of the camels, and the cavalrymen simply could not abide the smell of the camels. Now, the Median Empire, which is another one of the great successor states, and the last great successor state that we'll cover of Imperial Assyria, it was centered on the Persian city, on the Iranian city of Ecbatana, the modern-day city of Hamadan. Now, the Medes and the Persians were related Iranian peoples, and they had been the victims of repeated Assyrian attacks along their borders. Now, the Medes bore the brunt of the Assyrian incursions and were thus forced to organize themselves quickly to mount successful defenses against Assyrian incursions. Now, it was the Median king Cyaxares of Media who allied with Nabopolassar of Babylon to contest Assyrian hegemony in the Near East. And this alliance would eventually topple the Assyrian Empire. Now, the Medes then went on to unite the various Iranian tribes. They went into business for themselves after the fall of Assyria. They united the Iranian tribes. They established their hegemony in Iran proper before projecting their strength into the vulnerable sort of emerging new political states that were emerging from the former Assyrian provinces. Cyaxares and his successors were able to successfully consolidate these provinces in northern Mesopotamia and in eastern Asia Minor under their rule. And the Medes and the Persians are considered the first peoples to create cavalry-centric armies, and those are armies where the shock power, where the decisive arm in battle was cavalry, as opposed to infantry forces, which had been the decisive arm up until then. These cavalry forces were considered superior to the old chariot armies of the Bronze Age. The successor of Cyaxares, a man named Astyages, proved to be deeply unpopular with the Median nobility, and he was overthrown 30 years into his rule by one of his kinsmen, Cyrus. Now, the political change in Iran, the fall of Astyages to Cyrus, wasn't really considered a great deal at the time. It was nothing more than a change in dynasties with no great bearing on the wider world. The Medes, while impressive, were still, they were not of the great culture, the great urban-based or civilized culture that had emerged in the Near East. The Medes and the Persians were still just border barbarians. They were still hill tribesmen, really, the great heirs to the Elamites, the great Eastern threat. They weren't. It wasn't really viewed had the great change. And at the time, the Neo-Babylonians, the Lydians, and Dynasty 26 of Egypt were still strong and still thriving. Cyrus, the young Persian king, turned out to be one of the great conquerors in history. And he sort of epitomized. He sort of epitomized as the greatest of all the ancient kings, as a wise and judicious man. Cyrus swiftly overthrew the Lydian kingdom before taking the lands of the Neo-Babylonian kingdom and incorporating all of Mesopotamia and the Levantine shores into his domains. Cyrus, he thereafter was known as Cyrus the Great, and he dies fighting in what is now Transoxiana, as he sought to extend his empire to the Hindu Kush. Now, according to the not according, but its wars in the Hindu Kush, the battles that he was fighting were against a related people, a people known as the Scythians, and they were also Iranian nomads. Now, Cyrus was succeeded by his son Cambyses I, and Cyrus left Cambyses the task of conquering Egypt, and Cambyses undertakes the second documented successful invasion of Egypt, and he does so by having the Persian army cross the Sinai, along with a Phoenician fleet, sort of taking the port cities of the marshes. Cambyses steamrolls all oppositions in Egypt. He simply meets them in battle, defeats them, takes the cities. Cambyses steamrolls all the way through Egypt, and he conquers Egypt. And the conquest of Egypt and really Persian rule in Egypt stands in a major contrast to the Persian imperial career elsewhere. The Persians were generally regarded as tolerant conquerors. There's limited known instances of Persians deporting rebellious populations to distant quarters of the empires. The Egyptians and the Persians did not get along. The Egyptians resisted at every step the Persian attempts to install their overlordship, and the Egyptians resisted with great determination and great vigor. The campaign was notoriously hard for the Persians. With reports that Cambyses went a little mad. He went insane during the conquest. He committed atrocities against the Egyptians. The Persians, it was reported, were offended by the animal worship of the Egyptians. All of the ancient Egyptian gods had animal heads, and it was said that the Persians were deeply offended by this mixing of animals and humans, and they went out of their way to sort of desecrate Egyptian holy sites. There are other accounts that at Memphis that Cyrus had the Apis bull, which was a representation, a living representation of the god Horus, slaughtered and barbecued for his men. In the worst telling of the stories, that's what Cyrus did. And the Egyptians, they never reconciled themselves to the Persians. They launched repeated rebellions against Cambyses, and Cambyses, because of this resistance, became more and more determined to break the will of the Egyptians. Cambyses desecrated the tombs of Egyptian kings. He desecrated their mummies. He desecrated Egyptian temples, and really to no avail. Cambyses died in Egypt under mysterious circumstances, and an entire Persian army that was sent to Egypt went marching into the desert to put down a rebellion, and they were never seen again. They were never heard from again. To this day, there's still a lost army, some 50,000 strong, lost somewhere in the Egyptian deserts. And one day they'll be found because, I mean, you account for the swords and the spears and the all the other logistical and battle equipment that the army had to take with them. Someday somebody's going to find 50,000 swords in the desert. And we'll begin to slowly piece together what happened to Cambyses' army. But there's a lost Persian army, and at the time of his death, Egypt is still not reconciling. Egypt is still in open rebellion against Persian rule. They sort of inherit this mantle of becoming the great foil to Persian imperialism, much the same way that the Babylonians were the great foil to Assyrian imperialism. The situation in Egypt is so bad for the Persians that the Persians had to maintain a full field army to garrison the Nile, and they have to employ a Phoenician fleet to patrol the Nile River itself to just make sure that the Egyptians are not planning on launching any sort of large-scale rebellions against the Persians. Now, Cambyses' death in Egypt sparked a great rebellion in the Persian Empire, had the various conquered peoples tried to shake off Persian domination. The dynasty of the ruling house also fought amongst themselves. The Achaemenids, the ruling dynasty of Persia, they fought amongst themselves as various dynasts tried to claim the right to rule for themselves. And the royal figure, the great royal figure to emerge from this dynastic dispute was Darius I. And Darius is known as the great administrator of the Persian Empire. It was Darius and Darius was from a cadet line of the Achaemenid dynasty. He was not a son of Cyrus. He married one of Cyrus's daughter, a woman named Atassa. He was from he was not a minor, but he was just from a cadet line. He was not from the main line, from the line of Cyrus. He married into the line of Cyrus. And Darius, he reorganized the Persian Empire, utilizing all of the great resources and innovations that we have discussed thus far. Darius creates 30 satrapies or provinces throughout his empire. And each of these satrapies, each of these provinces are under the command of a satrap who was either a high-ranking Persian or Mede, or a member of the formerly ruling dynasty, the formerly ruling family. The satraps were responsible for the administration of their satrapy, and they were only really responsible to the great king. They answered to the great king alone. They were also visited by royal inspectors who came from Persepolis, one of the Persian royal capitals, and at the direction of the king, they simply inspected to make sure that the satraps were doing what the great king wanted them to do. Darius also had the foresight to separate the administration of a satrapy from its economic and its military aspects. That is, that the satrap was not the financial officer of the satrapy. That was a separate office. And the satrap was also not the military commander of the satrapy. That was also a separate office. There were separate... these offices were separate, and each of these officers, the satrap, the administrator, the administrative officer of the satrapy, the fiscal officer of the satrapy, and the military commander, the military officer of the satrapy, they were all equally accountable to the great king. Now, the long tradition of dividing offices proved well in the long run, especially when the great king rotated these offices among the great families of his empire. Now, the true genius of the Persians was that they managed to win over the various ethnic groups of the ancient Near East, with the exception, of course, of the Egyptians. All the other groups came to really like, if not just become well disposed to Persian hegemony. They allowed the Egyptian priesthood in Judea to return. They allowed the Lydian aristocracy in Asia and Western Asia Minor and the Babylonian elites in Mesopotamia to maintain their hold on local power. And this really explains the tranquility and the stability of the Persian rule. Again, with Egypt being the exception. The Persian kings improved communications throughout their empire. They improved trade routes. They facilitated trade throughout their empire, and really across the Near East. They built two things: the Great Royal Road, which was really just a grander scheme of the old Assyrian road network that linked the great thriving economic and cultural centers of the Near East. Um, they continue carrying out those type of policies that the Assyrians promoted, those cultural policies of endowing temples, sponsoring artwork, promoting trade, and recruiting local elites to serve them. By 500 BCE, the Persian Empire is the strongest and most civilized structure that has yet to emerge in the ancient Near East, and really the high watermark of any civilization in the world by 500 BCE. Now, the Persian Empire, which emerged to be a true testament to the last 30 centuries of human development, sort of hits a rock. Darius' great accomplishments, the great reorganization of the Persian Empire, will be tested in less than a year when a group of people on the fringes of his empire in Asia Minor, the Greeks, rose in rebellion against his rule. Now, the rebellion drew the Persians first into Asia Minor to put down the rebellion there, and then across the Aegean to confront the Greeks from the Greek homeland, who were aiding the Greeks in Asia Minor, who were rebelling against the Persian Great King. This confrontation would lead to the invasion of Greece, overseen by King Xerxes in 479 BCE. And this invasion will be seen as the first at the first instance in which the Greeks are really exposed to the wider world of Asia Minor. They've been exposed before, but it is at this point that they truly become exposed to the resources and the opportunities of Asia Minor. It will be something that we'll come back to in later lectures. Sort of lost myself for a minute. In two major battles, and a few more than two of the few major battles, the Persians will come close to snuffing out the Greeks. They invade and they burn the city of Athens, and then they are defeated in two major battles on the same day. Now, the failure of Xerxes' invasion had a number of consequences. One, Persian ambitions were checked. And two, the Greeks developed a unique identity. And three, the Persian Empire was rocked by very serious rebellions in the face of Xerxes' defeat. Egypt rises in rebellion because they see that the Persian Empire had been defeated by, again, barbarians on the western edge of the world, the Greeks. And again, the Greeks weren't really well known to the other peoples. The Greeks were, by all accounts, barbarians compared to these other peoples, who are all members of this larger, integrated economic tradition, economic and social tradition of the Near East. The Greeks are aware of it, but the Greeks are not really full members of it. So Egypt rises in rebellion in the wake of this Persian defeat, and Babylon also rises in rebellion against the Persians. And the Assyrians are always agitating, and this necessitates Xerxes' speedy return to return to establish Persian order and Persian rule in those more important regions of his empire. Now, the civilizations that we have covered laid the cultural and institutional foundations for the later Greek civilization, the later Greek and all the civilizations like the Romans, who are derived from Greek civilization. And the Greeks themselves represent a very different civilization with a different tradition from those of the Near East. And the most significant was this conceit that the Greeks had. And the Greeks had this conceit that they were different from all other peoples because they, as Greeks, lived under the rule of laws that they themselves passed in their own civic organizations, in their own policies. And with that, we'll break. We will break, and we will come back, and we will we will break here, and we will come back, and we will discuss the another region of the world, a region of the world that we haven't really discussed before, and that would be the Indus River Valley, and we will look at the Indus River Valley civilizations. As always, hit like, subscribe, and comment. I am Ted, and let me know what you thought about this lecture.